In 1975, approximately 83% of the S&P 500's total value was physical. Factories, machinery, land, equipment, things you could touch, see, and measure. Today, that number has completely flipped. Today, approximately 90% of S&P 500 market value is something you cannot touch, cannot see, and cannot hold. And that intangible value has a precise name: intellectual property. And the data on how it connects to where most billionaire wealth actually comes from is extraordinary. Before we go anywhere, I want to establish exactly what intellectual property is. Because most people have a vague idea of it. And vague ideas produce vague results. Intellectual property is a legal category. It is the ownership of something created by the mind. And it comes in 4 distinct forms, each one generating wealth through a completely different mechanism. The first is a patent. A patent gives its owner the exclusive legal right to produce, use, or sell an invention for a defined period, typically 20 years. The consequence of that is direct. During those 20 years, nobody else can legally produce that invention without your permission. That is a government-enforced market position. The pricing power that comes from that structure is significant. The second is a trademark. A trademark protects a brand, a name, a logo, a symbol that identifies the source of goods or services. Trademarks do not expire the way patents do. Maintain the registration, keep using the mark, and it is yours indefinitely. Apple's logo, Google's name, Nike's swoosh, each of those is a trademark asset, generating billions in brand equity. The third is copyright. Copyright protects original creative works, writing, music, film, software code, art. Copyright typically lasts for the creator's lifetime plus 70 years in most jurisdictions. That is a long runway for cash flow from a single creative act. A song written once can generate royalties every single time it is streamed, broadcast, or used in a film for decades after it was created. The fourth is a trade secret. A trade secret is any confidential business information that gives its owner a competitive advantage. Unlike patents, trade secrets have no expiration date, as long as the information stays confidential. And the strategic implications of that distinction are more powerful than most people ever stop to consider. Now, that shift from approximately 17% to approximately 90% did not happen overnight. And it did not happen by chance. It happened because of a very specific, very deliberate movement in how the most sophisticated institutional money in the world was structuring itself. And the data that documents this progression, tracked across multiple decades, makes the structural shift impossible to argue with. That is a complete structural inversion of what the most valuable companies on Earth are actually worth, over the span of roughly 45 years. And I want to be precise here. This data comes from Ocean Tomo's Intangible Asset Market Value study. Think about what that actually means. The companies making up the most powerful stock index in the world, the benchmark most investors measure themselves against, are approximately 90% comprised of assets that have no physical form whatsoever. No factory, no land, no inventory, no machinery. The value is in the IP, the patents, the trademarks, the copyrights, the trade secrets, the proprietary algorithms, the brand equity. And here's what most people miss. The institutional money understood this shift before it was obvious. It happened because the institutional money, the billionaires, the funds, the corporate architects, understood something that mainstream financial education has consistently failed to teach. That the highest margin, most scalable, most durable form of value creation is intellectual, not physical. Nobody talks about this part, not in most schools. Not in most personal finance content, barely in mainstream financial media. And the data on why that silence is so consequential is extraordinary. Before we go deeper, a quick note that I think is directly relevant to everything we are covering. Understanding exactly why IP holds this kind of structural position requires understanding the macroeconomic forces working underneath it. Inflation mechanics, debt cycles, how central banks actually operate, how the global monetary system is architectured at its foundation. I spent years researching and understanding these exact forces, going deep into the institutional mechanics that most financial education completely ignores. And I've created a complete course that deconstructs all of it, titled Applied Macroeconomics. 10 modules. Module 4 covers inflation and interest rates in precise technical detail. Module 7 covers commodities and hard assets in their full macroeconomic context. directly connected to everything we are covering in this video. Over 2 hours of content, zero fluff, stripped for clarity and value, with email support included. The link is in the description. Now, back to the data. Because the historical story of how this became the dominant wealth strategy is more instructive than most people expect. Imagine you have created the most valuable recipe in the world. A formula so precise that the product it creates has become one of the most recognized consumer brands in all of human history. Now, you have a choice. You can patent it, get 20 years of legal protection, and then watch it enter the public domain forever. Or, you tell nobody, you keep it a trade secret, and you protect it indefinitely. The Coca-Cola company chose the second option, and that single strategic decision is over 130 years old. The formula, known internally as Merchandise 7X, has reportedly been stored in a bank vault in Atlanta for the better part of a century. It has never been patented deliberately. Because the moment you patent something, the clock starts. 20 years later, the formula is public knowledge. A trade secret has no expiration. The protection is indefinite, as long as the secret holds. And the consequence of that single decision? The Coca-Cola brand trademark alone is independently valued at approximately $35 billion, separate from all physical assets. The franchise model, where bottlers pay to produce and distribute using Coca-Cola's IP, means the company generates cash flow from physical production it does not perform. Think about what that actually means. The cash flow is real. The physical labor is outsourced. The IP is what captures the value. Now, the Coca-Cola example is genuinely instructive, but it is not isolated. The pattern appears consistently across the most successful wealth architects in recorded history. Thomas Edison filed approximately 1,093 patents in his lifetime. That is a documented historical figure. But here is what most people miss about Edison. He was not just an inventor. He was a systematic IP architect. He understood that an invention without IP protection is, commercially, a gift to the competition. So he built systems to convert every innovation into a legally protected commercial asset, consistently, deliberately, at scale. The contrast with Nikola Tesla is one of the most important financial case studies in history that nobody teaches in any standard curriculum. Tesla was arguably the more technically brilliant mind. His contributions to alternating current, wireless transmission, and electrical engineering were foundational to the modern world. But Tesla's relationship with IP protection, business structure, and licensing was fundamentally different from Edison's. The same level of creative genius, radically different wealth outcomes. The primary differentiating variable, IP strategy. And the Edison-Tesla contrast, viewed through this specific financial lens, is one of the most instructive case studies in the history of IP strategy. Because this video is not about talent. It is not about effort. It is about understanding which assets you own and how those assets are legally structured. The third historical anchor is Disney. And this one is extraordinary in a different way. Walt Disney created Mickey Mouse in 1928. Nearly 100 years later, Mickey Mouse remains one of the most commercially licensed characters on Earth. Disney's entire valuation, in the hundreds of billions, traces directly back to an IP portfolio that began with a cartoon character and a concept called the studio system. Here is what most people do not know about Disney's copyright strategy. It has been extended by United States legislation multiple times. The Copyright Term Extension Act of 1998, informally called the Mickey Mouse Protection Act by critics, extended copyright terms significantly. The point here is not the politics of copyright extension. The point is what it reveals about institutional understanding of IP value. Disney understood the copyright was the asset, so it engaged every available mechanism to protect that asset. That is IP strategy at its highest institutional level. And here is where the global data makes this pattern undeniable. It is not just these three companies. According to the World Intellectual Property Organization, global patent filings grew from approximately 800,000 annually in the 1980s to over 3.4 million by the early 2020s. The institutional money has been filing IP at an accelerating rate for decades. This is not a recent trend. It is a documented, multi-decade strategic movement. And here is where it gets counterintuitive. The companies driving the most aggressive IP filing strategies are not small, independent inventors. They are the largest corporations on Earth, the ones whose valuations most people simply accept without asking what the valuation is actually based on. Which raises an obvious question. What exactly do those companies look like when you analyze their valuations through the IP lens specifically? Because the numbers, and I want to be precise here, are not what most people expect when they first see them laid out. Let's look at the actual data, not theory, not philosophy. The documented financial structures of the world's most valuable companies. And I want to start with Microsoft, because Microsoft is arguably the clearest, most readable demonstration of an IP licensing business model at industrial scale. Microsoft's primary revenue engine is not hardware. It never has been. Windows is a copyright asset licensed to device manufacturers globally. Office 365 is a software IP subscription. Azure Cloud Services run on proprietary IP infrastructure. Every dollar of that revenue flows from intellectual assets that were written once and are licensed infinitely to millions of users simultaneously. According to Microsoft's publicly filed annual report, its cloud revenue, driven almost entirely by IP licensing, reached approximately $169 billion in fiscal year 2025. $169 billion. From IP that has no physical form, no factory output, no raw material cost per unit produced. That is what the licensing mechanism looks like at industrial scale. Now let's look at Apple. And Apple requires a slightly different lens, because Apple does manufacture hardware. But here is what most people miss about Apple's actual business model. The hardware, the iPhone, the Mac, the iPad, is the delivery mechanism. The real asset is the iOS ecosystem. The App Store is a copyright and trademark-protected platform that Apple owns exclusively. Every developer who sells on that platform pays Apple approximately 30% of their revenue. Apple created an IP toll booth on an entire global digital economy. It built the platform, owns the platform, and collects a fee from every transaction that runs through it. According to Apple's publicly filed annual report, its services revenue, the segment driven primarily by IP-based businesses, reached approximately $109 billion in fiscal year 2025. And the margin on services is significantly higher than the margin on hardware, because IP has no per-unit production cost once it has been created. Google. This one is particularly interesting, because Google's core IP asset is something most people have never thought of as an IP asset at all. The Google search algorithm is a trade secret, one of the most valuable trade secrets in existence, with no patent, no public documentation, and no expiration date. Android, Google's mobile operating system, is licensed to handset manufacturers globally. But the Google apps, the Play Store, the search integration, those are proprietary IP assets that come bundled with Android through licensing agreements. Google generates revenue from devices it does not manufacture through IP licensing agreements that give it access to billions of users it does not directly serve. Alphabet's total revenue in 2025 exceeded $400 billion, the first time in the company's history it crossed that threshold. The overwhelming majority derive from IP-based business models. And here is where it gets genuinely interesting. If you think the individual company examples are striking, wait until we get to the full scale of the global IP licensing market. The number is large enough that it is worth understanding in precise context, because the instinctive reaction to it is usually skepticism. We are getting there, but first, two more case studies that complete the picture across very different industries. Disney. We've already covered the history. Now let's look at the current financial structure, because it is more architecturally revealing than most people realize. Disney's theme parks generate billions annually in revenue. That is physical infrastructure: land, buildings, rides, operational staff. But here is the question most people never stop to ask. Why are those theme parks worth attending? Remove the IP, the characters, the franchises, the stories, and the physical infrastructure is concrete and steel. The IP is what makes the park worth the ticket price. The physical asset is the delivery mechanism. The IP is the actual product being consumed. Disney's licensing division generates billions annually from IP assets created decades ago. Characters, music, film franchises, licensed to toy manufacturers, apparel companies, and theme park partners worldwide. According to publicly available data, Disney has consistently ranked among the top global licensors by retail sales, with licensed merchandise generating tens of billions in global retail sales annually. The IP was created once. The licensing generates the cash flow. The physical infrastructure serves the IP, not the other way around. Now the pharmaceutical case study. And I want to handle this one carefully, because the numbers are genuinely significant and the mechanism is worth understanding precisely. When a pharmaceutical company receives regulatory approval for a new drug, the patent protecting that drug grants approximately 20 years of market exclusivity in covered jurisdictions. During those 20 years, the patent holder is the only legal manufacturer of that specific compound in markets that recognize the patent. The manufacturing cost of pharmaceutical compounds varies significantly across different drugs, but in many documented cases, the production cost per unit is a fraction of the market price. The gap between production cost and market price is what economists refer to as the IP premium, the value the market assigns to the exclusive legal right to produce something. According to research from the Congressional Budget Office, pharmaceutical companies cite IP protection as the primary economic justification for investment in drug development, which averages over $1 billion per approved drug. The IP protection is not incidental to the business model. It is the business model. Remove the patent, and the entire commercial logic of drug development changes fundamentally. And this pattern, IP as the primary commercial architecture, appears consistently across industries that share nothing in common at the surface level. And this is the part that changes everything. Because when you zoom out and look at the world's wealthiest individuals specifically, the pattern does not just appear in companies. It appears in the personal wealth structures of the people at the very top of the global wealth distribution. Elon Musk's primary wealth is Tesla equity and SpaceX equity. Both companies are built on proprietary IP, battery technology patents, manufacturing process trade secrets, software IP that took years to develop. Jeff Bezos' wealth is primarily Amazon equity. Amazon's most profitable division, AWS, is a cloud computing IP platform running on proprietary infrastructure and software. Mark Zuckerberg's wealth is Meta equity, whose core asset is a social graph algorithm and a data IP position that took 2 decades to build and is structurally difficult for any competitor to replicate. Bill Gates built Microsoft on software IP licensing. That was the engine. His current wealth is diversified across multiple asset classes, but the engine that built the foundation was IP. And here is the part that nobody in mainstream financial media ever explains clearly. None of these individuals became wealthy by owning physical assets first. The IP came first. The cash flow from IP funded everything else. The wealthy diversify across asset classes, real estate, equities, commodities, bonds. That is documented, and it is important context. But the engine that generated the capital to deploy into those assets, in case after case, across the world's wealthiest, was intellectual property. Most people assume the ultra-wealthy got rich by owning physical things. The institutional data shows something completely different. They got rich by owning ideas, legally structured, commercially deployed, and licensed at scale. So we now know what IP is. We have the historical proofs, we have the billionaire data across multiple industries. But IP itself is not cash flow. IP is a legal right. The mechanism that converts that legal right into cash flow has a specific name. It is called licensing. And understanding how licensing actually works at a structural level is what separates people who intellectually appreciate IP from people who understand why it generates wealth. A license is a legal agreement in which the IP owner grants another party permission to use their IP in exchange for payment. The critical detail is this: the IP owner retains ownership throughout the entire licensing transaction. The IP is not sold. It is not transferred. It is not consumed in any way. The owner keeps the asset and receives payment for its use. And the same IP can be licensed to an unlimited number of parties simultaneously, without diminishing the asset itself in any measurable way. This is structurally different from every physical asset class in a direct mathematical way. When you sell a unit of physical inventory, you no longer have it. When you license IP, you still have it, and you can license it again immediately. A piece of software can be licensed to 1 million users simultaneously. The software does not wear out. The code does not depreciate. The marginal cost of the millionth license is effectively zero. There are 3 primary licensing models. Each one has a distinct commercial structure worth understanding precisely. The first is exclusive licensing. The IP owner grants one specific licensee the right to use the IP, and no other licensees are permitted for the duration of the agreement. Because exclusivity is commercially valuable, exclusive licenses typically command higher royalty rates. The licensee pays a premium for the market protection that comes with exclusivity. The second is non-exclusive licensing. The IP owner licenses to multiple parties simultaneously, potentially to an unlimited number of licensees. Individual royalty rates per licensee are lower in a non-exclusive arrangement, but the aggregate cash flow across all licensees can dwarf what a single exclusive arrangement would generate. Microsoft licensing Windows to hundreds of millions of device users simultaneously is a non-exclusive licensing model at industrial scale. One asset, unlimited simultaneous revenue streams. The third is franchise licensing. This is the most architecturally complete licensing model, and the one that most clearly demonstrates IP as a total business system, not just an isolated asset. When a franchisee opens a McDonald's restaurant, they are paying for the right to use McDonald's IP, the brand, the recipes, the operational systems, the supply chain relationships. McDonald's does not prepare the food at most of its locations globally. The franchisee performs the physical work. McDonald's collects the IP royalty on the entire operation. According to McDonald's publicly filed annual report, approximately 95% of McDonald's restaurants globally were franchised at year-end 2025, meaning McDonald's generates revenue from physical production it does not perform through IP licensing. That is the franchise licensing model as a global cash flow architecture. Build the IP system once, license it to operators, collect royalties from physical production you never perform. Now, here is where the research moves from institutional to structural. Long before I had a formal definition for it, I was already obsessed with one question. What can I build that keeps generating value after I stop actively working on it? What scales with no ceiling? What costs nothing to replicate once it exists? I did not have a name for it then, but going deep into how the world's wealthiest people are actually structured, I found the answer. And everything I had been building, deliberately or instinctively, fit one precise definition: intellectual property. The question I was already obsessing over, that was just an intuitive search for IP, without ever using that term. And the reason that framing is relevant here is not personal, it is structural. Because that obsession with building things that compound infinitely is the same instinct driving the IP strategies of the world's wealthiest. Now, the global licensing market, the number I mentioned earlier. According to data from the World Intellectual Property Organization and global licensing industry reports, total global IP licensing revenues are estimated at approximately $400 billion or more annually. To put that figure in direct context, $400 billion annually is larger than the entire GDP of many mid-sized developed economies. And the majority of that cash flow flows to a concentrated group of IP owners in technology, pharmaceutical, entertainment, and brand licensing. Here is what most people miss. That concentration is not accidental. It is the mathematical result of the licensing model itself. The entity that owns the IP captures the licensing cash flow. The entities that use the IP pay the royalties. Ownership, legal, documented ownership, determines which side of that equation you are on. Now, here is the layer of this analysis that most financial content never reaches. IP's structural position is not just about the asset itself. It is about the macroeconomic environment that surrounds it. And the data on how IP interacts with inflation, monetary expansion, and the borderless nature of the global economy makes a structural case that is difficult to argue with. Start with inflation. Inflation is a documented, persistent feature of modern monetary economies. Central banks in most developed economies target approximately 2% annual inflation. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate policy design embedded in the modern monetary framework. The consequence of persistent inflation for physical assets is straightforward. The cost of maintaining, replacing, and insuring physical assets rises over time. A factory built today costs more to maintain in 10 years. Real estate requires property taxes, maintenance costs, insurance, all of which inflate alongside the broader price level. IP licensing cash flow, by contrast, is typically structured as a percentage of revenue or sales price, not as a fixed nominal amount. As prices rise, as the economy grows and inflates, revenue-based royalties rise alongside it. The IP owner does not need to renegotiate the asset or replace any component. IP also carries no depreciation schedule, no physical replacement cycle, no maintenance overhead. The structural comparison with physical assets on a total cost basis is significant. The second macroeconomic factor is currency and monetary base expansion. Over the past century, every major fiat currency has experienced significant loss of purchasing power relative to real assets. This is a documented historical pattern across multiple countries and multiple monetary regimes. Holding cash in an environment of systematic monetary expansion means holding an asset whose purchasing power is being gradually reduced over time. IP ownership is not a monetary claim. It is a legal right, and legal rights are not denominated in currency units. A copyright does not lose value because a central bank expanded the money supply. A patent does not depreciate because interest rates moved in one direction or another. The right to license is the right to license, independent of the monetary base. The legal structure of ownership persists, regardless of monetary policy decisions. The third factor is the borderless nature of IP, and this is where the structural case becomes genuinely global in its implications. Physical assets are jurisdictionally confined. A piece of real estate exists in one country, under one legal system, subject to one set of tax laws and property rights. If the political or regulatory environment in that jurisdiction changes, the physical asset is exposed to that change with no ability to move. IP can be licensed globally, from a single point of ownership, simultaneously across dozens or hundreds of jurisdictions. A piece of software, a trademarked brand, a copyrighted film, each can generate royalties in 100 countries at the same time, from a single point of legal ownership. No logistics cost, no cross-border shipping, no customs, no duties, no physical distribution infrastructure required. The IP travels as a legal agreement, a contract. And contracts have no weight, no value, and no shipping cost. And here is where it gets counterintuitive. In an era of increasing economic nationalism, trade friction, and geopolitical complexity, IP's borderless nature is becoming more strategically relevant, not less. Physical supply chains can be disrupted. Physical assets in foreign jurisdictions carry concentration risk. IP rights, enforced through international legal frameworks, operate under a structurally different set of legal conditions. And the data on this, across inflation cycles, monetary expansions, and global economic shifts, is consistent. Now, I want to be completely honest about something here. This video has presented a powerful structural case for IP based on documented data. And that case is real, but there are three things I want to be precise about. First, building IP requires real work, significant upfront time and effort. The passive cash flow phase is real, but it follows an active creation phase that is neither fast nor easy. Anyone presenting IP as a shortcut to passive income without that context is not being straight with you. The passive phase is earned, not assumed. Second, not all IP becomes commercially valuable. The majority of patents filed are never exploited commercially. Most creative work never generates meaningful royalties. The structural advantage of IP is real and documented, but the structural advantage does not guarantee individual outcomes. Execution is not optional. It is the deciding variable. Third, IP law is jurisdiction-specific and genuinely complex. What this video covers is a global structural analysis for educational purposes. Real IP strategy in a specific business context requires real legal expertise in your specific jurisdiction. That is not a caveat. It is simply a fact. And I want to be clear about what this video is not arguing. This is not a video telling anyone to go register a patent or restructure their life around IP as an asset class. It is a structural analysis of documented institutional behavior, what the data consistently shows about how the world's wealthiest are actually structured. The honest answer is, the conclusions you draw from that data are entirely yours. So here is where all of this lands. The nature of wealth creation in a modern economy is not what most financial education teaches. The historical record, the balance sheets, the patent filings, the licensing revenues, they all point in the same direction. The institutions and individuals who understood the structural power of intellectual property earliest and built around it deliberately are the ones whose wealth compounded most powerfully. And that pattern is not confined to one industry, one country, or one era. It appears consistently across tech, entertainment, pharmaceutical, and consumer brands. The data on this is publicly available to anyone willing to look at it precisely. And the most honest thing I can say at the end of this video is this. Understanding what actually drove wealth creation over the past 50 years is foundational to understanding what the concept of wealth itself means in a modern economy. Most financial education in schools, in mainstream media, in standard personal finance content has largely missed this structural shift. Now you have seen it. So the question becomes, what do you do with that understanding? That is not a question I can answer for you, but it is a question that is now impossible to ignore. Quick note, everything covered in this video is purely educational and analytical in nature. None of this is financial or legal advice of any kind. Always consult qualified professionals before making decisions specific to your own situation. If you stayed to the end of this video, you clearly find these structural questions about wealth and institutional behavior as fascinating as I do. The videos appearing on your screen right now go even deeper into the mechanics of how the global financial system is actually architectured and how institutional wealth is actually built. If this video gave you a genuinely new way of looking at what wealth is and where it actually comes from, a like and a subscribe tells the algorithm this kind of analysis is worth putting in front of more people. Thanks for watching.